Full story: Lily's shocking decision that changed her life forever. Welcome to today's video. We're about to dive into some shocking full story that will make you question trust, love, and betrayal. If you've ever been curious about how lives are impacted by infidelity, you're in the right place. These stories are real, raw, and emotional, so make sure to stick around. If you enjoy the content, please hit like and subscribe to Silent Wars for more real-life stories and deep discussions. Let's get started. For most of my adult life, sacrifice had been my constant companion. From my late teens through my early 30s, I dedicated myself to the relentless pursuit of responsibility, often at the expense of my dreams, my health, and my happiness. There were no vacations, no leisurely afternoons spent reading books or wandering in the park. Instead, there were 3 jobs, each demanding its share of energy and time, leaving me with little more than the constant hum of exhaustion. At first, I didn't mind. After all, the house needed to be saved. It was my parents' legacy, and I had promised them when I was just a teenager that I would do whatever it took to keep it. For years, I lived on a diet of cheap ramen, the kind of food you eat when there's no time or money for anything else. I remember the evenings when I'd come home after the night shift, too tired to cook, too weary to do anything but collapse into bed. It was a lonely existence, but I kept my focus on the bigger picture. I was doing this for them, for my family, the house, the one that had seen us through so much: my father's job loss, my mother's tears, our collective fears of losing it all, was my anchor, my mission, and my reason to keep going, day after grueling day. There was no time for me to explore my own passions, or even to entertain the thought of building a life of my own. Dreams of going to college, studying photography, traveling the world, they all faded into the background, becoming faint whispers drowned out by the noise of my reality. Instead, I spent my 20s working myself into the ground, watching my youth slip away one overtime shift at a time. But it wasn't just about the work. It was about the responsibility. I felt the weight of knowing that if I stopped, even for a moment, the house could slip through our fingers, and all that my parents had worked for would be lost. And yet, despite the fatigue and the endless sacrifices, I had made it. At that moment, standing in the living room, I could finally see the fruits of my labor. The mortgage was paid off. The house was free. I could feel the pride swell in my chest as I glanced at the family photos on the wall, all the memories that had built this home. It was supposed to be a moment of celebration, of victory, of hard work and sacrifice. I had finally won, and it was time to rest. But that night, as I hung the decorations for my party, the one I had dreamed of throwing for years, I could sense that something was wrong. There was a tension in the air, an undercurrent of something unspoken. My mother, as she fussed over the final details, seemed a little too preoccupied. She smiled, but her eyes didn't meet mine, and that familiar feeling of being invisible crept back into my chest. No one seemed to acknowledge the years of hard work I'd put in, the countless hours I had spent ensuring that everyone else could chase their dreams while I put mine on hold. It was always about their happiness, their successes, and now I was about to find out that it would always be that way. When the doorbell rang, the house filled with the usual crowd: family, friends, and distant relatives. My younger brother, Lucas, arrived fashionably late, as usual, flashing his signature cocky grin. He was dressed in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. And yet, despite the wealth he flaunted, he had never once offered to help me with anything. While I worked 3 jobs, he bounced from one get-rich-quick scheme to the next, with no regard for the sacrifices I made to keep everything afloat. I gave him a tight smile, my heart heavy with the memories of all the things I had given up for him, for my parents, The evening unfolded like any other family gathering. My mother and father exchanged pleasantries with the guests, their voices rising in excitement as they chatted about everything from gardening to the latest neighborhood gossip. Lucas, standing in the center of the room, proudly told everyone about his latest business venture, his travel vlogging plans. And then, it happened. Dad stood up, his glass raised high, and began the announcement. He called me out for my role in organizing the party. Always the reliable one, always the one who holds everything together, he said, his voice thick with pride. But then, his tone shifted, and my stomach dropped. But the real excitement, folks, is about Lucas. Our son is going to be a travel vlogger. He's already got 10,000 followers on TikTok, and we're so proud of him. My heart pounded in my chest, and the room seemed to spin. It was like a punch in the gut. I had spent the last decade sacrificing everything, from my health to my dreams, and this was how they thanked me. They had remortgaged the house I had worked so hard to pay off to fund Lucas's dreams of being a travel vlogger. I couldn't breathe. The champagne glass slipped from my fingers as I stood frozen in shock. How could they do this to me? How could they take away everything I had worked for, all the sacrifices I had made, and give it to someone who had never once shouldered any of the responsibility? Lucas's carefree attitude, his sense of entitlement, his confidence in a future built on the sacrifice of others, it was all too much to bear. But as I stood there, my chest tightening with a mixture of anger and disbelief, I realized something. This moment, this night of supposed celebration, was no longer about the house, or the mortgage, or even the party. It was about me finally facing the truth. For years I had been invisible, my sacrifices taken for granted. And now, as I stood in the middle of the living room, I knew that I had to change. I had to stop pretending that everything was fine. It was time to take control. The evening was supposed to be one of celebration, a reward for all the sacrifices I had made over the years, but instead, it was marred by an unspoken tension that seemed to hang in the air like a storm cloud, just waiting to burst. As I stood in the living room, preparing for the party, my mother, Jane, helped me hang the last of the decorations. The lights shimmered softly against the walls, the house filled with the familiar scent of freshly baked cookies and the comforting aroma of a catered spread that I had spent weeks organizing. "Everything looks perfect," she whispered to me, her voice soft with pride, as she stepped back to survey the room. Though I tried to focus on the positives, there was a part of me that couldn't ignore the undercurrent of resentment that bubbled beneath my smile. I forced myself to nod and return her smile, but inside, I could feel the bitterness creeping in, like a cold wave washing over me. The house, the one I had worked so tirelessly to save, was finally paid off. Every last penny of the mortgage was gone. This should have been a moment of pure joy for me, a moment where I could finally take a breath and celebrate all the years of exhaustion and sacrifice. Yet, as my mother stood beside me, arranging the final touches on the decorations, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly my victory. I had spent so many years working overtime, missing birthdays, skipping family events, and forgoing any opportunity to live my own life, all for the sake of keeping the family house from slipping away. My youth had vanished into the hours I spent behind the counter, waiting tables, cleaning, or doing whatever it took to make ends meet. My dreams of going to college, of pursuing a career in photography, had all been put on hold because I was the one who had to step up. I had been the reliable one, the one who gave up my own aspirations to support my family. I had done it willingly at first, but over time, the cost had become too high to ignore. My mind drifted back to those years of sacrifice, the long nights when I'd lay awake, listening to the wind howl outside, wondering if I would ever have the chance to live for myself. The birthdays I missed, the vacations I never took, the friends I had lost touch with because I was always working. But I had accepted it. After all, this house meant everything to my parents. They had given so much to keep it, and I was determined not to let their sacrifices go to waste. But now, as I stood there, watching my mother smile with pride as we finished the final preparations, I realized that, despite all I had done, this moment wasn't mine. It felt like I was still invisible in their eyes, just as I had been for so many years. The doorbell rang, and I could hear the chatter of voices growing louder as the guests began to arrive. My heart beat a little faster, the anticipation of the night's festivities mixed with the anxiety that had taken root deep in my chest. The house filled with familiar faces, family, friends, neighbors, each one offering their congratulations, their praise for the work I had done to keep the family afloat. But as the door opened and my younger brother, Mark, walked in, the tension in the room intensified. Mark was late, of course, as usual. His signature cocky smile flashed across his face, and he strolled into the living room wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than my entire monthly grocery budget. His presence, as always, was larger than life, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to shift around him. He greeted everyone like the star of the show, with his loud laughter and easy charm, completely unaware of the weight I had carried for years to keep the family standing. I couldn't help but notice the contrast between his carefree life and the years of struggle I had endured. Where Mark seemed to glide through life without a care in the world, I had fought tooth and nail for every single thing I had. While he had spent his time going to parties and chasing after fleeting dreams, I had been trapped in a cycle of exhaustion, working endless hours just to ensure that the house didn't fall into foreclosure. The disparity between us was impossible to ignore. As I watched him, a wave of frustration surged through me. Here he was, waltzing in late, with no appreciation for the sacrifices I had made, no acknowledgement of the life I had put on hold for the sake of our family. And yet, he was the one who would be celebrated tonight, not me. He was the one who would be the focus of everyone's admiration, their praise. It was as if my entire existence had been reduced to nothing more than background noise in his story. I plastered a smile on my face, trying to keep my emotions in check. But the bitterness that had been simmering for so long now bubbled to the surface. This was supposed to be my moment of freedom, my moment of relief, and yet all I could feel was the weight of resentment pressing down on me. As I glanced at my mother, who beamed with pride as she watched Mark's arrival, I realized just how much of my life had been spent trying to earn their love and approval, only to be overshadowed by someone who had never once carried the same burden. It was in that moment, surrounded by the noise of celebration and the overwhelming feeling of being invisible, that I understood something I had refused to see for so long. My sacrifices had never been about earning anything. They had been about fulfilling a role I had been given, a role I had never questioned until now. But now, I wasn't sure if I could keep pretending anymore. This moment, this celebration, wasn't for me. It was for everyone else. Everyone except me. And I was done with it. The evening, which was supposed to be a joyous celebration of my sacrifice, quickly morphed into something I hadn't expected. The clinking of glasses, the laughter, and the hum of conversation filled the room, but none of it seemed to reach me. My stomach churned, the weight of the moment settling heavily on my shoulders. I had worked so hard for this. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, had led up to this point. The house was finally paid off. This was supposed to be my victory, a testament to the years of selflessness I had given, but I could feel the air shift. Something was wrong. Dad, who had been happily sipping his champagne all evening, suddenly stood up. His movement caught my attention, and the room fell quiet. His voice rang out, excited and filled with pride, but all I could feel was dread building up in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't part of the plan. he began, his tone bubbling with excitement. But I have something important to share. My heart skipped a beat. This was my moment. My long-awaited moment to finally breathe easy, to stand tall and proud of the home I had saved, the place that had been my anchor for years. But the next words that came out of his mouth sent my world spinning. Lily has been the reliable one, Dad continued, his eyes scanning the room full of guests, always working hard to keep us afloat. But the real excitement is about Mark. He paused, a proud grin spreading across his face. He's found his calling. He's going to be a travel vlogger. My blood ran cold. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The room around me seemed to blur, my vision narrowing as the implications of what my father had just said sank in. The house, my house, the one I had worked myself into the ground to save, wasn't mine anymore. As Dad went on, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, he talked about Mark's latest plans. How Mark had built an audience online, how his TikTok followers were growing by the day, how this was his big break. The excitement in Dad's voice only deepened the knot in my stomach. But it wasn't his excitement that had me frozen in place. It was the realization that my decade of hard work, my years of sacrifice, meant nothing to them. Then it hit me. They had remortgaged the house. The one thing I had fought for, the only thing I had managed to hold on to despite everything, was now being used to fund my brother's dream of becoming a social media influencer. The house was gone. For years I had worked tirelessly, putting in hours and hours of overtime, taking on jobs I hated, all to pay the bills, to cover the repairs, to keep the house standing. I had given up so much for my family, and now, in one single moment, they had taken it all away. The house was no longer mine. It had been remortgaged, the very thing I had fought to pay off, to finance Mark's dream of traveling the world and sharing his experiences online. I stood frozen, my glass clenched tightly in my hand, the liquid inside trembling with the force of my emotions. My fingers ached, but I couldn't bring myself to set the glass down. My heart was pounding so loudly in my ears that I couldn't hear anything else. The sounds of the celebration continued around me, but it all felt distant, as if I were no longer a part of it. The reality of what they had done was too much to bear. All the years of missed birthdays, the holidays spent alone, the friendships that had faded away because I was too busy trying to keep this family together, it was all for nothing. Everything I had given up, every ounce of my youth and energy, had been thrown away in an instant. And the worst part? They didn't even see it. They didn't understand what I had sacrificed. Mark, with his dreams of being a vlogger, his carefree attitude, and his sense of entitlement, had always been the golden child. He never had to worry about money, about paying the bills, about holding the family together. And now, he was the one being celebrated, while I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken dreams. As my dad finished his speech, raising his glass to Mark's future, I felt the weight of the years of my life slipping away. My mother, standing beside Dad with her proud smile, was completely unaware of the devastation brewing inside me. She patted Mark on the back, congratulating him for his success, for finding his calling, and I felt something in me snap. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the realization that I had been invisible all along. The truth was staring me in the face. My family had never truly seen me. They saw me as the reliable one, the one who could be counted on, the one who would always put their needs before my own. But I was tired. I was tired of being the one who sacrificed everything for everyone else, and in return, got nothing but empty praise. I turned away from the crowd, my chest tight with the weight of everything I was feeling. My parents didn't understand what they had done. They couldn't. And Mark? He would never understand the price of the dreams he was chasing, the price of the house that had been the only thing holding us all together. I excused myself from the room, my head spinning with the knowledge that my life, my sacrifices, had been nothing more than a stepping stone for someone else's dreams, and I had had enough. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse under the weight of them. My entire body went numb, and the room seemed to close in on me, suffocating me in the reality of what I had just heard. I stood there, frozen, as my father casually told me that the mortgage, the very one I had worked so hard to pay off, had been remortgaged, and he hadn't bothered to tell me. Not only that, but they had done it right after I made the final payment, just as I had thought the house was finally, truly mine. Wait, when did you take out this new mortgage? I asked, my voice shaky but determined to keep my composure. The words felt like they were being torn from my chest, each one more painful than the last. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the tremor in it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Oh, about 3 weeks ago," Dad replied casually, as though it was just another piece of information to throw into the mix. "Right after you made the final payment, the timing couldn't have been better." It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me, and I was left standing in a place I no longer recognized. All those years, all those sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the missed birthdays, the lonely holidays, the countless hours spent juggling multiple jobs, all of it had been for nothing. My father had taken the house I worked so hard to save and used it to fund my brother's dream. Mark's travel vlogging career was now the priority. My years of suffering, of eating ramen for dinner and forgoing my own dreams, had been nothing more than a stepping stone for him to live a life of luxury and adventure. The anger rose inside me like a tidal wave, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't let it consume me, not yet. I had worked too hard to let this moment define me. I clenched my fists at my sides, my nails digging into the palms of my hands, but I kept my voice calm. I had to take control of this. I wasn't going to let them make me feel small, like my entire existence had been reduced to nothing more than a means to an end. I glanced around the room, where the celebration continued to unfold, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. My mom and Mark were laughing, surrounded by friends and distant relatives, their voices a blur of congratulations and excitement. They had no idea the magnitude of what had just happened. They were caught up in the moment, celebrating something that wasn't even real. My sacrifice, my decade of hard work, was just another footnote in their lives, something to be overlooked and discarded when it no longer suited them. "I think I need to make a phone call," I murmured, excusing myself from the room. My words were quiet, but they felt heavy, like a final acknowledgement that the person I had been, the one who silently endured everything, who did everything for the sake of my family, was gone. I turned away from the party, the clinking of glasses and the sound of laughter growing fainter with each step I took. I walked through the hallway, past the pictures on the wall, all those memories of moments I had been present for only as an observer. The family vacations I never took, the dinners I never ate, the holidays I missed, all of it was laid out before me, framed in pictures that seemed to mock me now. It was as if my entire life had been a series of sacrifices that no one had ever truly appreciated. And now, it was all slipping away, replaced by my brother's fantasy. I reached the bathroom, the door shutting behind me with a quiet click. I leaned against the cool tiles, taking a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The betrayal felt like it was eating me from the inside out. I had spent 10 years giving everything I had, sacrificing my future. And this was how they repaid me? By remortgaging the house that I had worked so hard to save, to fund a dream that wasn't even mine. I had been the one who held everything together, the one who made sure the bills were paid and the roof stayed over our heads. But it was Mark, with his carefree attitude and his dreams of traveling the world, who got the reward. The phone in my hand felt heavy, like a weight I couldn't escape. I stared at the screen for a moment, the familiar number already dialed, the one I had hoped I would never need to call. Trevor Anderson, my lawyer, the one person who could help me make sense of this. I wasn't sure what I was asking for yet, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let them get away with this. The phone rang twice before the familiar voice answered. "Trevor Anderson's office," he said, his tone professional but warm. "It's Scarlett," I said quietly, my voice trembling even as I tried to control it. "Listen, remember that contingency plan we discussed? The one about protecting my interest in the house payments? It's time to proceed." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then the sound of Trevor adjusting in his chair. "Are you sure about this?" he asked carefully. "Family conflicts can get ugly fast." I closed my eyes, steadying myself against the flood of emotions that threatened to overtake me. I was done being the silent one, the one who always took the back seat. My family had taken advantage of my sacrifices for far too long, and it was time for me to take back control. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Send the papers." I retreated upstairs, my feet heavy against the floor, as the weight of everything I had just learned settled in my chest. The laughter and chatter from downstairs seemed distant, as though I were standing in another world, far removed from the celebration that had been planned to honor the years of hard work I had put into saving the family home. But none of it felt like a celebration anymore. It felt like a lie, one that I was no longer willing to live in. I reached the bathroom, locking the door behind me with deliberate slowness. I leaned against the cool, tiled wall, letting out a shaky breath. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel everything: the sting of betrayal, the anger, the overwhelming sense of injustice. My parents had remortgaged the house, the one I had sacrificed so much to save, and now it was all being used to fund Mark's dreams. Their actions had erased my decade of hard work, but I wasn't going to let that stand. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the number I had stored away for emergencies. David, a lawyer I had kept in touch with over the years, had been my backup plan all along. When I first set up the legal framework to protect myself, I never imagined I'd need it this soon, but I knew, deep down, that a moment like this might come. I had to be prepared. The phone rang twice before David answered, his voice familiar and calm. "David," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's time to proceed." The words felt cold in my mouth, calculated, but it was the truth. The plan I had set in motion all those months ago, when I had signed the trust documents, was now my only way out of this. My parents had no idea that the house, which they thought they had just remortgaged, was legally mine. They had assumed their actions were a simple, harmless decision, but they had no idea the legal structure I had created to protect myself. I could almost hear David nodding on the other end of the line, a professional calm in his voice. "I understand. Are you sure you want to move forward with this? Family disputes can get messy." I closed my eyes, the weight of his words hanging in the air, but my resolve hardened with every passing second. This wasn't about family anymore. It wasn't about the years of sacrifice I had given, the hours I had worked myself to exhaustion, all for the sake of keeping this family together. No, this was about finally taking control of my own life. The house, which had been a symbol of my struggle, would now be the symbol of my power. I had paid the price. It was time for me to take what was mine. "I'm sure," I said, my voice calm but with a steel edge that surprised even me. "Send the papers." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the one behind the scenes, unnoticed, sacrificing everything for the benefit of others. Tonight, the tables had turned. The house, which had been a burden to carry for so long, was now my weapon. It was my way to reclaim what had been taken from me, piece by piece, over the years. The sounds from downstairs, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the chatter of family members drifted up to me. The celebration was still in full swing, completely unaware of the storm brewing just above them. I felt no guilt, no hesitation. My emotions had shifted from a simmering anger to a cold satisfaction. This was my moment. This was my power. I stood in the bathroom looking at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, but I could see a determination in my eyes that hadn't been there before. The past decade of my life, spent juggling multiple jobs, working myself into exhaustion, had been leading me to this point. I had been the one holding everything together, but I had never truly held anything of my own. Now, I was taking it back. I looked down at my phone, the texts from Trevor coming in, confirming that everything was in place. The documents were ready. The legal structure I had put in place was airtight. The new mortgage my parents had taken out was now null and void. The house, my house, was legally mine. I could feel the power of it, like a steady pulse in my chest. I had taken control of my destiny, and no one, least of all my family, was going to take it from me again. I knew there would be consequences, that this decision would change everything. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally standing on solid ground, on my own terms. This wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. It was about taking responsibility for my own future, even if it meant severing ties with the family that had never truly seen me. The plan had unfolded, and now there was no turning back. I opened the bathroom door, stepping out into the quiet hallway. I could still hear the celebration going on downstairs, but now it felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. I had already stepped away from that world, the world where I was invisible, where my sacrifices were taken for granted. I was done being that person. With one last glance at the hallway, I walked downstairs, knowing that everything had changed. The house was mine. My future was mine, and nothing would ever be the same again. Later that evening, the celebration was in full swing. Mark stood at the center of the room, his confidence radiating as he proudly showed off his latest travel videos to the guests. He was eager, almost giddy, describing his upcoming adventures to Bali, an exotic destination that seemed to hold all the promise of a carefree future. With every word he spoke, I could hear the unspoken sense of entitlement in his voice. This was all happening because of the house I had spent the last decade of my life working tirelessly to pay off. As Mark bragged about his new life ahead, my stomach churned. The weight of everything I had sacrificed felt unbearable. For years, I had skipped meals to afford the bills, worked overtime to keep the house in one piece, and gave up every ounce of my youth, all for the sake of this family. Yet here I was, standing silently in the background, my sacrifices erased as if they had never mattered. To Mark, Bali was the next logical step in his journey, while to my parents, this was just another of his dreams coming true. But they didn't see the cost of that dream. They didn't see me, the daughter who had been the one to bear the burden of responsibility, while they indulged in Mark's vision of success. The room was filled with praise and laughter, everyone congratulating Mark on his plans, his social media presence, and his apparent success. But no one seemed to acknowledge the truth that the money to fund this dream wasn't Mark's, it was mine. It was the result of my years of toil, of countless hours spent away from the things that mattered to me. The sacrifices I made had bought the very foundation for his fleeting dreams, yet it felt like no one truly saw me. No one truly understood the weight of what I had given up. My parents, especially, continued to support Mark's vision, praising him for his ambition and his willingness to take risks. It wasn't that they didn't love me, they did, in their own way. But they had always seen me as the responsible one, the one who would never make waves, the one who would always pick up the slack when things went wrong. My role had always been to maintain order, to hold the family together, and in doing so, I had become invisible. They had never understood the price I paid. I wanted to scream, I wanted to shout, and remind them of all the years I had spent sacrificing my own happiness for their comfort, to remind them that it was me, not Mark, who had kept this house from falling apart. But instead, I stood there, frozen, watching the celebration unfold as though it were a distant memory of a life that had never truly been mine. They called it responsibility, as if it were a duty I had chosen to take on, as if my years of working 3 jobs, eating ramen for every meal, and missing out on everything that life had to offer were simply the natural course of things. But they were wrong. It wasn't responsibility, it was sacrifice. It was a selfless act that went unnoticed, a price paid without recognition. And as Mark continued to revel in his dreams, the reality of what I had lost and what they had taken from me hit me harder than any physical blow could. I watched my father's face light up with pride as he patted Mark on the back, as if my years of sacrifice meant nothing. I watched my mother smile, her eyes soft with affection for her son, while never once acknowledging the quiet bitterness that had settled in my heart. They didn't see me. They didn't see what I had given up to make their lives easier. For a moment, I considered leaving. I thought about walking out the door, driving far away, and leaving this family behind. I was tired of being the invisible one. The one who could never chase her own dreams because she was too busy making sure everyone else's dreams came true. But then, something in me shifted. I realized that walking away wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't erase the sacrifices I had made, and it wouldn't stop them from dismissing me. I had to stop waiting for their approval. I had to stop hoping that they would one day see the cost of my sacrifices. It was time for me to see it for myself. I wasn't just the responsible one. I was the one who had paid the price for their comfort. And it was time for me to take that back. It didn't take long for the truth to come crashing down around me. The legal documents were delivered, and the trust structure was set in place. Everything I had put into motion was finally coming to a head. I had worked too long and too hard to let this slip away without facing it head on. It was time to confront my parents. As I stood in front of them, holding the papers that would change everything, I could feel the weight of my entire life's sacrifices pressing down on me. Years of working 3 jobs, missing birthdays, holidays, and the opportunities that most people took for granted, they had all led to this moment. And now I had to face the reality that my parents, the ones who were supposed to have my back, had completely disregarded everything I had done for them. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't about me breaking down anymore. This was about standing up, about making sure they understood the gravity of what they had done. "Everything I've done for this family," I said, my voice thick with emotion but resolute. "All the years I worked, all the moments I lost, and this is how you repay me? By mortgaging the house for Mark's travel dreams?" The words echoed through the room, and for the first time, I saw my parents in a different light. They didn't know how to respond. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I had been the one who had always been there, the reliable one, the one who sacrificed everything for the sake of keeping the family afloat. But now, that same family stood before me in shock, not understanding how their actions had completely disregarded my years of hard work. It was as if, in their eyes, I was still just the responsible one, who was always supposed to take care of things without question. They had never seen the toll it took on me, the weight I carried for them, and now it was too much to bear. I had become so accustomed to putting my needs aside, to making sure everything was taken care of for them, that I never stopped to ask for what I deserved. But I wasn't going to do that anymore. This time, I wasn't going to back down. My father, still holding his glass of wine, stared at me in disbelief. He looked like he wanted to say something, but his words faltered in his throat. It was as if he couldn't believe I was challenging him, questioning his decisions. The years of me being the silent, reliable daughter had created an image of me that didn't align with the person standing in front of him now. He didn't know how to deal with the anger and hurt that had finally spilled over. My mother, on the other hand, looked at me with a mix of guilt and confusion. Her eyes, red from the stress of the evening, avoided mine. She couldn't meet my gaze because deep down, she knew what I was saying was true. They had taken the house, my sacrifice, and leveraged it without even thinking about how it would affect me. She had always told me that I was the strong one, the one who could handle everything. But the truth was, I was exhausted. And in this moment, I couldn't hide it anymore. "How could you do this?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "After everything I've done, everything I've given up for this family, you just gave it away? You took the one thing that was supposed to be my reward, my hard-earned victory, and used it to fund Mark's fantasy?" My father's face turned red, and he opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was stunned, caught off guard by the confrontation. He had always assumed I would just accept my role, always the reliable one, always the one to pick up the pieces. But I wasn't that person anymore. "We thought it was for the best," he finally muttered, as though the justification would make it right. But I could see through it. It wasn't about what was best for me. It was about what was convenient for them. They didn't care about the years I had spent working myself to the bone. They didn't even consider what I needed or wanted. I felt my hands ball into fists at my sides. The bitterness I had been holding in for so long started to rise, but I pushed it down again. This wasn't about bitterness, it was about finally taking control. "You never saw me, Dad. You never saw what I gave up. And now you're telling me it doesn't matter because Mark's dream is more important?" I said it with a calmness that shocked even me. "I did everything for you, for this family, but you never once considered the cost to me." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. I had given enough. I wasn't going to fall back into the old pattern of picking up the pieces when no one else was willing to see the damage. The room felt heavy, like all the years of silence and sacrifice were finally being acknowledged. I could see the realization hitting them. They had taken me for granted. They had used me for their convenience. This time, I was done being invisible. I was done being the responsible one. I was done being the one who always gave everything without asking for anything in return. And as I stood there, finally speaking my truth, I realized that this was the moment everything changed. I had stopped pretending, and for the first time, I felt like I was finally seeing myself for who I really was, not just the daughter, not just the reliable one, but someone who had a right to be seen and valued. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back. What had started as a quiet gathering of celebration had turned into a confrontation that shattered everything. I had finally revealed the secret I'd been hiding for so long, the truth about the house, about my sacrifices, and about the betrayal that had broken me. Standing there, in the silence that followed the eruption of anger and disbelief, I realized that this was the moment of reckoning, not just for my parents, but for me. The weight of everything I had sacrificed for them, for this family, had come to a head. I had done everything right for so long, held the family together, kept the house from falling apart, and put my own dreams aside to make sure theirs came true. But now, in the cold aftermath of the confrontation, I understood something I had been avoiding for years. I had been invisible. My sacrifices had been taken for granted, my desires buried beneath the weight of responsibility. And now, finally, I was seeing the truth clearly. The house, my house, was legally mine. It wasn't just a piece of property. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for, of every sacrifice I had made. It was my redemption, my power, and my freedom. I had taken control of my future, but even in that moment of victory, I couldn't ignore the other side of the coin, the cost of what it meant to break free. Is this peace or revenge? Mila, my cousin, had asked me earlier, her voice soft but probing. I hadn't known how to answer. The question lingered in my mind long after the confrontation had ended. Was I seeking peace, or was I simply trying to avenge years of sacrifice and neglect? Could I even differentiate between the two anymore? I didn't have the answer. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to. For the first time in years, I felt a shift in my soul, something I had been yearning for, but never realized until now. It wasn't peace that I felt. It was power. Power to make my own decisions. Power to live on my own terms. Power to stop being the one who always sacrificed for others, always kept things running while everyone else lived their lives. It was a power I had never allowed myself to embrace, a power I had denied for far too long. But in that moment, standing alone, I knew I had finally reclaimed it. I had broken the cycle. The guilt, the fear, and the sadness that had always accompanied my decisions were gone. I had no more obligations. I had done my part, and now I was free to live for myself. And yet, as the silence settled around me, I realized that the emptiness of that freedom felt strangely heavy. Was this the peace I had always dreamed of? Or was this just another void waiting to be filled with the same old patterns? I glanced around the house, the very house that had once been my anchor, my responsibility, and my burden. It was mine now, but the people who had once filled it with laughter and life were now distant memories, tangled in the fallout of the truth I had forced into the light. My parents, broken and confused, would never see me the same way again. And Mark, my brother, would never understand the price I had paid to get him to where he was. Would they ever come back? But there was no turning back now. The truth had been spoken, and my role in this family had been rewritten. I had stepped out of the shadows and claimed my life. Mila had been right in one way. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival. It was about breaking the cycle of always being the one who gave, the one who did, without ever being truly seen. The cycle that had kept me trapped in a role I never asked for had finally been shattered. For the first time in my life, I could see myself. The power I felt wasn't about making my parents or my brother suffer. It was about stepping into my own, finally accepting that my life had value beyond the roles I had played for so long. And though I didn't have all the answers, and I couldn't be sure where this road would lead, I knew one thing for sure: I had control. And that was enough. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was at the mercy of everyone else's expectations. The choices ahead of me were mine to make. And in that freedom, I found something more important than peace. I found the strength to live for myself. In the weeks that followed, everything began to unravel. I had expected there to be some consequences, but the extent of the damage was far beyond what I had anticipated. My parents, once pillars of strength in my life, were now shattered, broken by their own actions. The fraudulent mortgage applications my father had made came to light, and it wasn't long before the legal repercussions started to pile up. The house, the very thing I had fought so hard to protect, was now a symbol of everything gone wrong. The family that once prided itself on unity and togetherness was now caught in a web of lies, debts, and betrayal. Mark, my younger brother, was no better off. His once promising travel vlogging career had crashed and burned, his social media empire nothing more than a dream. The sponsors he had relied on to fund his adventures pulled out, one by one, and his carefree life began to unravel in front of my eyes. I had spent years working to make sure he had everything he wanted, always picking up the pieces when his dreams failed. And now, here he was, with nothing but the wreckage of his aspirations and a sense of entitlement that had been fueled by the sacrifices I had made. But it was my mom's tears that hit hardest. She wept for what we had lost, for the family that had crumbled around us. I could hear her sobs in the next room, the sound of someone who had seen everything she thought she knew slip through her fingers. Yet, even as I heard her crying, I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I couldn't bring myself to care. What was the point? For years, I had been the one to pick up the pieces, the one to keep everything together while they chased their dreams. But now that I had finally taken control, now that I had broken free from the chains of responsibility, I realized something. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need to be the one who kept everything running at the expense of my own life. Family, for all its supposed warmth and security, can become toxic when you're the one who's always holding things together. It becomes suffocating when the weight of others' expectations is constantly on your shoulders, when every dream they have is yours to fund, every mistake they make is yours to clean up. I had spent so long putting others before myself, sacrificing my own happiness and dreams for the sake of everyone else, that I had lost myself in the process. But now I was free. Free from the constant pressure to be everything to everyone. Free from the never-ending cycle of sacrifice and selflessness. Free from the guilt of not being able to fix everything for them. It wasn't the kind of freedom I had imagined. It wasn't the peaceful, uplifting release that I had fantasized about during those long, lonely nights. No, it was bitter. The weight of everything that had happened, everything that had been lost, still hung over me like a cloud. But it was freedom, nonetheless. The price I paid for this freedom was steep. I lost my family in the process. The people I had spent my entire life trying to protect, to save, had been torn apart by their own choices, and I couldn't be the one to put them back together anymore. I had tried to hold us all together for so long, but now I saw that it was never my responsibility to carry that weight. I had been carrying a burden that wasn't mine to bear. As I watched the fallout from my decisions unfold, I couldn't help but wonder, had I done the right thing? Had I made the right choice in severing the ties that had bound me to them for so long? The answer was unclear, and I knew it would take time to find out. But one thing was certain. I was no longer bound by the chains of guilt and responsibility. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I could live. I could finally make decisions that were about me and not about what others needed from me. The weight I had carried for so long was gone, and though the freedom tasted bitter, it was mine. It was mine to keep, and no one could take it from me. Family might always be a part of me, but the shackles that tied me to them, those invisible chains of sacrifice and obligation, were finally broken. And that, in its own way, felt like the beginning of something new. In life, we often find ourselves carrying burdens for the sake of others, whether it's family, friends, or responsibilities that weigh us down. The lesson here is that while sacrifice and selflessness are virtues, they should not come at the expense of our own well-being and happiness. It's important to remember that we are not obligated to bear the weight of everyone else's dreams and struggles. Sometimes, breaking free from the cycle of constant giving is the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and for those we care about. By recognizing our own worth and stepping into our power, we can live more authentically and experience freedom. It's not selfish to prioritize our own needs, and it's not wrong to let go of things that drain us. True peace comes when we acknowledge that we, too, deserve to be seen, appreciated, and cared for. No matter our age, we can still reclaim our joy and forge paths that reflect who we truly are, not just who others expect us to be. Life is too precious to spend solely in service to others without honoring our own dreams, desires, and well-being. It's never too late to choose ourselves, to break free, and to live a life that feels whole and true. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope these full story gave you some insight into the emotional roller coaster of relationships. Don't forget to hit like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to Silent Wars for more incredible content. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.